With me now, Conservative MEP Daniel Hannan. Welcome to the Sunday Politics. Now, Britain won't have to pay any money till the second half of next year. There's a 50% rebate on it, and there's going to be no interest. It's not a bad deal.
The deferral is an achievement, definitely. But the idea that it's been halved... OK, yesterday, Andrew, I was at the retail park in Newbury, and I bought a teapot for £10. And I handed over a £20 note, and I got a tenner in change. Now, I could say, look, I halved the bill, right? It's exactly the same logic, with, by the way, the slight difference that this teapot, the excellent Argos teapot, will be of some value to me, whereas in the case of the EU, we're paying for the privilege of belonging to the world's only shrinking trade bloc.
But instead of paying €2 billion next month, we're going to pay €1 billion in the second half of next year in 2 instalments. That is a result.
It is a result that we are paying later, and it is a result that we're not being charged interest in the meantime. So why make the silly claim that it's half what it was going to be when you're simply counting the net rather than the gross figure by factoring in the rebate, which, as you've just heard, was always going to be there?
Well, we say the rebate was always going to be there, but no one seemed to realise it was
no one
always
except
going to be there.
the European Commission, who are the people...
In your many interviews on this subject, you never mentioned this was rebatable.
It's not really up to what I say or what up to the Chancellor. It's up to, well, I was assuming, since the period covered by the whole of this 1.7 billion was one wherein the rebate applied, that yes, it would. And by the way, I just want to make a really substantive point about the money here. 1.7 billion or 850 million, whether you want to count it with or without the rebate. This is happening in the context of a rise which no one is arguing about in 2013. Our net contributions in 2013 went up by 2.7 billion. Our net contributions have quadrupled in the last 5 years. So this prosperity surcharge, or irritating though it is to be charged extra for having had the wisdom to keep out of the euro, is actually fairly small beer compared to the huge rising bill, enough in gross terms to give the whole country a 2/3 rebate on their council tax, which, as I say, we're paying to belong to the only trade bloc in the world that is in economic decline.
Let me move on to the European Arrest Warrant. There's a vote coming up in Parliament, as you know. Now, the Home Secretary claims that she's ensured safeguards to avoid the kind of scenarios that you've criticised in the past. And she therefore says you should now vote for it. Why won't you?
Well, I'm not an MP, so it's not going to come before me. But I'll tell you why I'm... Right. I will tell you why I'm against it. The King family, the people who took their child out of Southampton Hospital, they were constituents of mine, and I was involved with their case as a constituency MEP. The European Arrest Warrant, when it was brought in, was something that was presented as an anti-terrorism measure. We were told it was necessary in the fight against the Taliban and so on. And yet, human nature being what it is, if you give those awesome powers to our CPS and our police, they will start using it routinely, even in a case like that, treating it effectively as a crime to take your child out of the NHS and look for treatment elsewhere. And that's why it is a disproportionate power to be placing in the hands of the authorities.
But even Michael Howard, not the softest touch when he was Home Secretary, pretty strong Eurosceptic as well. He's looked at the changes that Theresa May has got. He thinks, yep, it makes it much better now. He now supports the reformed European Arrest Warrant.
As usual in politics, there are people of goodwill on both sides, and I don't question the sincerity of the people who disagree with me. You can make a case either way, but I am convinced that on balance it is a bad thing. Yes, I know the security services want it. Of course it makes life easier for them. Of course it's more convenient. But a state in which we automatically do whatever the police want is a police state. The role of politicians is to weigh the convenience of the police against the freedom of the subject. As for the safeguards that Theresa May was talking about this morning, there are a number of people, both in the other member states and in the EU authorities, who say that that is not their understanding. And ultimately, of course, it will be the European Court of Justice that decides, not our own courts, whether these safeguards apply. The European Arrest Warrant is seen in Europe not as a freestanding extradition device, but as part of the creation of a pan-European system of criminal justice with its own prosecution service, its own police force and its own court. All
right, so people will be wondering this. It is the policy of your party to sign up to the European Arrest Warrant. Is it the policy of your party to pay the £850 million next year? It is the policy of UKIP to do neither. It's your policy to do neither. Ipso facto, why not join UKIP?
On this issue, I think my party is wrong, or at least my party leaders are wrong. However, in general, I think they're doing a pretty good job. We've created more jobs in this country, this incredible figure, in the past 4 years than have the other 27 members of the EU put together. Crime is falling, the school reforms are working, the welfare reforms are working. So in general, I think that the PM deserves another go. But I think he's made a mistake on the EU.
But you think he makes a mistake on most matters of EU. Don't you think he should say, if I don't get what I want in these negotiations coming up, if I win the election, big if, but if I don't, we'll come out. He's not saying that either. You would.
Of course I would. But ultimately, it isn't going to be he or I who decides, or you, or even your distinguished panel. It's going to be the electorate as a whole.
Well, it's up to all of us, because we all get a vote.
Right, and, you know, and we'll take that. I mean, what's odd, if I were him, I would try and get a better deal, a substantively better deal, that I could then present as genuinely representing a new departure. In practice, we know that the terms that are being sought are just tweaks, are just optical, presentational changes. So the referendum, when it comes, is going to be on the EU that we've come to know over the past 40 years.
All right, stick with us, don't go away. I don't want to join our panel in a minute, but I'm now going to Cambridge, where the Conservative Business Minister, Matthew Hancock, joins us. Matthew Hancock, welcome to the programme. Now, all of the payments we make, our contributions to the EU, are subject to rebate. In the case of top-up payments, it's a 50% rebate we get. So the Chancellor's only done what was his anyway. He's not got any more.
No, he's managed to halve the bill, as you were saying in your rather eloquent questions, if I may say so. The point is that everybody was expecting this to be a £1.7 billion bill once it was made clear that there was a bill, and of course that was very last minute. On your programme, many times, lots of people came on saying, you know, we don't want this £1.7 billion bill. It was not at all clear that the rebate would apply. The bill was expected to be 1.7 billion, and so to be able to then negotiate that down to get the rebate applied, to make the bill only 850 million, is a significant step forward. And of course, having it delayed and no interest paid is good news too. So it, you know, it was going to be 1.7 billion. It's now going to be 850 million. That's a cut in half.
Yes, I understand it's a cut in half. My point is it's a cut in half you were going to get anyway, particularly if the government had done its homework. Maybe it did proceed not knowing it was going to get this rebate. But 2 weeks ago, a press release from the EU's Commissioner for Financial Programming said, quote, the UK will benefit from the UK rebate for the additional payments in 2014. There it is in black and white. That was 2 weeks ago.
No, that was about a different part of the budget. There's also proposals elsewhere to put the budget up. These are not proposals that we're in favour of. And as part of that negotiation, there's a proposal there for a 500 million rebate. And I think if you look in detail at the press release that you must have in front of you, it mentions the 500 million figure. So that is about a different part of the budget. On this part of the budget, it was not at all clear that the rebate would apply, and so I think it is good news that we've been able to go and cut it in half. And it shows that if you take a firm negotiating stance, then you can make progress in Europe, and that is all part of, you know, the plan which we've got for the start of the next Parliament to set out what we want to achieve, to negotiate and to get a far better deal. And I'm more optimistic than Dan is about this, because he's not right to say that the negotiations have been set out. They haven't been set out. I think we will go forward with a substantial package for renegotiation and then renegotiate and hopefully be able to have a reformed Europe that works better not only for us but for the whole of Europe.
But since it's conceded that we do get a rebate on all of our contributions, if there was any doubt about this, when the bill first landed on the Treasury's desk or the Foreign Office desk or whoever, why wasn't it the first thing they did was to call Brussels and find out, is this subject to the rebate? Why did you wait so long?
Well, because the scale of this bill was only made clear very much at the last minute. Angela Merkel also only knew in the week that it was then presented. Others too. In fact, I think President Barroso said that the Commission themselves, or he at least, only knew at the last minute. This is because although the debate over how the statistics of how big your economy is had been debated for some time, it was only at the last minute that the impact of then on all the different countries was put together. So the fact is that, you know, as the Prime Minister has made very clear, he only found out about it the day before the summit on the Thursday.
So why didn't he ask, surely this is subject to our rebate? Why didn't he ask that?
Well, what he did, he immediately said, we're going to have some emergency meetings of finance ministers to sort this out. And that's what's happened. And we came back with the rebate applied and the bill having been halved, from everybody on your programme saying this was a 1.7 billion bill, and many of them quite cross about it. I think the fact that it's now going to be an 850 million bill demonstrates not only that it's been halved, but also that this is progress.
But, well, you call it progress, but it's 850 million now on top of the 11.3 billion, which is our contribution in 2013. A contribution that in 2008 was 2.6 billion. 2.6 billion to now 12 billion. How would you like to describe that as progress?
Well, I think that, firstly, cutting the European budget for the first time was a big achievement of this government.
We're still paying 4 times more than we did in 2008.
Well, I'm not going to defend the fact that Tony Blair gave away a large chunk of our rebate and got nothing in return.
That only explains part of it, as you know.
Yes, and part of it is because our economy is growing better. I'm glad that our economy is growing better than almost anywhere else in Europe. I think that's good news. I think that's, you know, there's been a lot of hard work to get us there, but that is good news, and part of this is a consequence of that. Part of it is because Blair gave up the rebate and got nothing in return. But overall, do I want that tackled? Of course I do, because I think that the whole of Europe needs to be reformed to be successful in a 21st century where the rest of the world is growing very fast, and we need to be trading with the whole world, and we don't want to be held back by unnecessary regulation, unnecessary costs coming from Brussels. But the plus side is that there is a benefit to being able to trade with Europe, and I hope that in a negotiation we can get rid of some of the costs that burden not only our economy but also other European economies, and at the same time benefit from being able to trade with the continent and break down trade barriers with the rest of the world. So there is a good outcome potentially possible here, but we've got to negotiate very hard to get it, and then we're the only people who will put that to the public in a referendum.
And if there is not a good outcome to these negotiations, how would you vote, in or out?
Well, I'm an optimist. I think that there will be a good outcome, and I think that you fight for that.
But supposing you don't get a good outcome, how would you vote?
Well, that depends on the outcome of the negotiation.
No, I've just said supposing you don't get a good one. Supposing you get very little of what you want, how would you vote?
Well, you know, as I say, I'm an optimist. I hope that we will...
Yeah, I understand that, but suppose your optimism proves to be forlorn, how would you vote?
Well, let me put it this way. It isn't about how I vote. As Dan Hannan said, it's about how the public vote. And the fact that there is a referendum at the end of this negotiation helps to strengthen the hand of those who will negotiate, because everybody knows if you want to get the best price for your carpet, you have to be prepared to walk out of the souk.
Oh, so you think that we should say if we don't get what we want, we should walk out?
That wasn't what I was saying. I was saying the fact
you weren't. I thought you just did.
No, the fact that there is a referendum of the people at the end of it means that we have to negotiate a good deal to be able to then take that to the public.
Or we should walk out, you're saying?
Well, if there were a no in the referendum by the British people, then of course we'd follow through on that.
I'll leave you to go back to the Cambridge souk. Matthew Hancock, thanks for joining us. Daniel Hannan, what did you make of that?
Well, sadly, that isn't where the government is. We've gone into the souk and we've said to the carpet guy, listen, I want you to understand at the outset that I'm going to buy this carpet. Now let's sit down and we're really going to haggle over the terms. If you have no bottom line, you're in a very weak position. And the proof of that is how we are now defending this additional increase on top of what you rightly said was already a quadrupling of our budget increase. And it's your classic thing. Here is a bad thing, a bill net of £850 million more, enough to pay for 30,000 NHS nurses and fund their pensions. What we're going to do is we're going to say that there could have been something even worse, and then when the even worse thing is taken off the table, we're left with the still unquestionably bad thing, and we present it as a victory. Now, does that seem to you a robust negotiating position?
Is it a robust negotiating position? I throw it to you. I mean, in a sense, how is this playing? I mean, it's clear that it's quite a complicated issue. Will the public think, hey, there's been a sleight of hand, as the Financial Times said yesterday, Or will it just think, hey, we were going to pay 1.7 billion, now it's 850 and we don't have to pay it to next year. Well done, George.
I think George Osborne might be able to get away because there'll just be this simple headline that he halved the amount that we were due to pay. But we all know that any sum of money that goes from the UK to the EU has to go through the rebate machine, if you like it. And this was always going to happen. And it's interesting.
Well, you said we all know that, but I don't remember, and never mind the politicians, I don't remember anybody in the media, including ourselves, telling me that this would be subject to rebate. I can't find it where any mention of it.
The Tory Treasury Twitter team challenged Peter Spiegel, who's the FT bureau chief, why didn't you mention the rebate? To which he said, when a plane takes off, we don't report that it's going to land. It was pretty obvious that it was going to happen. What is interesting, when we were compiling our stories on Friday about this, we got whisper in our ear from the government, oh, we received legal advice that the rebate may not apply. Now, what I think is interesting is if George Osborne answers questions about this or gives a statement on it in the House of Commons, will he, bearing in mind the importance of telling the truth to MPs, will he repeat that line to MPs that they received legal advice that the rebate wouldn't apply? Because I have to say, from my knowledge of Brussels, everything goes through rebate. I'm not quite sure that is wholly true.
That's another piece of legal advice we'll never see, Helen. I mean, is it now possible that actually privately they knew all along that it was going to be 50% of what the demand was, but they just didn't bother to tell us because they could then pull this as the rabbit out of the hat?
Well, if you think about it, if you take that off the table, what have they actually achieved? They've achieved a deferral. So when Cameron stood up and said, I'm not going to pay anything like this amount on this date, unfortunately he is, in fact, going to pay exactly the amount he said he would, but he isn't going to pay it on the date. So if you take out that rebate, there's very little has been achieved here. The point I find very interesting about this story is the Tory MPs, at the risk of this becoming a love-in, respect to Dan, because he's come on and said that this was all smoke and mirrors. Where are the Tory awkward squad this weekend who would normally be railing against this? They're absolutely nowhere, and that shows me that they're more interested in using the EU to hurt David Cameron than they are sometimes about the principles of it.
This whole episode reminds me of one of Rahm Emanuel's favourite sayings. This is President Obama's former chief of staff.
Mayor of Chicago.
Yes, he says that in politics, if you're explaining, you're losing. You should never end up with a policy or a position which is so complex that voters have to be told with a tortuous explanation why it's a good thing. And what the government's been doing over the past 2 or 3 days is a lot of explaining. Once you take into account an interest exemption over here, once you take into account a payment deferral in the scheduling over there, once you take into account the vexed question of the rebate, then we've achieved something good. Even if it's entirely true, you've lost voters halfway through the sentence, I think, or they suspect you're being tricksy with them. So the lack of clarity more than anything else is.
But does it hurt the government or not?
Yes.
And there is a danger that has been identified by Dan, which is that the government, to use Dan's language, puts up a straw man saying, oh, we're going to have to pay this all sum of money, knowing that it's not going to happen. The other straw man that Dan has talked about is the government talking about benefit tourism. It's awful benefit tourism. Look, we've solved it, when we know that there's very, very little benefit tourism from EU citizens.
All right, we need to leave it there. Hannan, thanks for being with us this morning.